We're looking we're looking at lesson 12 for our church leadership course. This lesson is a little different than some of the other lessons, but it's a very important lesson to study because it gives us some guidelines in how to have a good discussion or a good meeting. A lot of people don't like meetings. Some people dislike meetings so much, if the church has a meeting, they won't even attend. Then there are others who like to go to the meetings, but sometimes their being there causes confusion and disruption. They may not intend for it to be that way, but I want to say this up front. One of the most important things you can do in a meeting as we look at another lesson is have an agenda or an outline done by the person who is guiding the meeting before the meeting begins. But then you get the people together and you have the need to have some guidelines for having a good discussion. The purpose of a meeting is to maybe plan things or discuss a problem or try to get together and see what the situation is with the church or something of that nature. This lesson gives us some good rules or guidelines for having a good discussion. In Amos chapter 3 and verse 3, we have a passage that reads from the New American Standard Version, "Do two men walk together unless they have made an appointment?" Now, an alternate reading for making an appointment is, let's say, have an agreement. And the Bible has at times things that are very specific to a point, but sometimes passages like Amos 3:3 can be seen as Bible principles or a principle that can be applied in different situations. So the question is, can two men walk together unless they are in agreement on how they want to do that? So we're applying that principle to good discussions so that, yes, we're going to agree to meet. We're going to have meetings every so often, or maybe it's two people, maybe it's more. But yes, we've agreed to have a meeting. And then let's say you have a leader. Question number one is, may I be the leader of this group? That question is asked to the group. He asked the group, are you giving me permission to be the leader of this group? There may be times when it's a different leader, but for a specific meeting, that's been two men, people have agreed to meet, say the men of the church or the elders. Elders sometimes have a chairing elder or an elder chairman for the month, and they rotate that each month. And this question, may I be the leader, is asked so that everybody's clear that they've given permission. Yes, we agree you can be the leader of this group. And it's important to write that note down and that everybody understands it. Number two is, will we start on time? One of the most important things that we can learn in leadership is being on time or being punctual. Let's say that a group has agreed to meet at 2:00 on Sunday afternoon for a meeting of the church. And I'm not talking about worship or Bible study, but a group of the men, for example, or the elders are going to meet. So you're meeting at 2:00, and then everybody agrees to that. And so, okay, the question is, will we get there on time? And will we start on time? If we're meeting at 2:00 and some people show up a little early, fine. But if you agree to start at 2:00, then everybody should be ready at 2:00 or whatever the time is. You also need to consider how long you want to meet if you want to have a good meeting. We know sometimes some issues you cannot put an end time on because it's going to take some time to deal with this. However, people's time is important. So let's say that you say we're going to meet for 30 minutes, 30 minutes for this. Or maybe if it's something more important, we're going to meet for an hour. Or you might need a longer time period. But if you agree that you'll start at a certain time and you agree on what time you're going to stop, 30 minutes, hour, hour and a half, whatever, then everybody agrees that once we get to that time we've set to end the meeting, we're going to stop. Now, it might not be the very second. Sometimes there's something that may need to be said, but this is organizational, and this helps people be better organized and better prepared, and you're not wasting a lot of time in the meeting. You only have a certain amount of time, use it well. Now, number 4 is, will we speak one at a time? Again, we have Bible principles that we can put into place. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, we have a section of scripture that deals with speaking in tongues. However, it is a church meeting. It is a gathering of the church where people are speaking, setting aside the fact that one may be speaking in a tongue or a language, and there may be the need for an interpreter, according to verse 27, which may be very critical because maybe not everybody doesn't understand. But if there's no interpreter, he must keep silent. This is talking about someone who speaks a language that nobody else in the room speaks, but he needs to be heard and he needs an interpreter. What we're looking at here is another principle. Look at verse 31. For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and all may be exhorted. Now, we understand the purpose of the person speaking. If it's a language that other people don't understand, you need an interpreter. Let's still look at the principle. Why is it important to speak one at a time? Because 2 people speaking or 3 people speaking causes confusion. You can only listen to one person at a time. So it's important to have a rule that if one person is speaking, they speak, not 2 or 3 people speaking at one time. Again, this is a principle we learned. We don't have miraculous tongue speaking in the church today, but we do have people that I've been associated with who their original language is not English, and maybe I don't know their language. I'll speak in English, then the interpreter speaks. But it's important to note everybody speaks one at a time. That way everybody can listen. Everyone can understand what's being said and process it and think about it. When more than one person is speaking, it causes confusion. And that's why we have the verse 33, for God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. So it's an important principle to put into place. The next one, number 5, asks the question, will we agree not to text, send emails, read text, read emails, take phone calls unless maybe it's a suspected emergency? Because if someone is speaking, if they're teaching, and someone is doing this right here, they're not paying attention to the speaker. And it's rude to the speaker. It's disrespectful. We should not be doing that in worship. We should not be doing that in a meeting of the people. Focus on your purpose. We understand emergencies arise, but it's really a good thing to put that phone down, put it on silent, or don't even bring it into the room unless for some reason you have some notes in it to use for the meeting. Now, number 6, will we speak or talk where others can hear? Or will we speak softly and in small groups where others will not know what is being said? There are 2 things in number 6. If I can't hear you or you can't hear me, we are not communicating. When you speak, speak up where people can hear you, because sometimes someone will speak and say, "What did they say? I could not hear." It's the responsibility of the person speaking to speak loud enough for everyone to hear. Going also back to the second part of number 6 is 2 or 3 people getting off in a group over here. Someone is talking, they're guiding the meeting. You've given them permission to lead the meeting, and these people are off over here and they're talking. I've had that happen. I've never done it, but I've wanted to say, if you're not interested in the meeting, that's fine, but please don't sit over there and talk, because it distracts the other people. And it goes back to the principle of 1 Corinthians chapter 14, speaking one at a time. It's disrespectful to do that. And number 7, will each person speak for himself or for herself? Or will he try to speak for others, like they, them, everybody, sometimes even speaking for God? Now, it's, I don't know what God thinks about everything. I know what he says in the Bible about a lot of things. I don't know what everybody does. And I don't, sometimes somebody says, well, I don't know who they are. And, or everybody, it's a broad, well, everybody knows that. Number one, maybe a point is made. Well, everybody knows that. Everybody does not know that. And even if they did, it's important to talk about it, and it's rude and inconsiderate of other people to try and speak for them. I can't speak for something about someone that I don't know. I can't speak for others. I can only speak for myself, because I am the one who knows this or that about whatever is being discussed. And I certainly should not. Sometimes somebody say, well, I think God thinks. I think God thinks. You don't think what God thinks. You might know what God has already said about something. But sometimes people want to make it look like, well, God must think this, but they're not using the Bible. So it's important, speak for yourself. Number 8, will we have the right to all our feelings, the painful as well as the pleasant? We all have feelings, and we all respond to things differently. Some people will get emotional over a certain discussion subject, or maybe a certain person that they're talking about trying to help. Some people get angry when things come up. They'll get angry at the way things are going or something somebody said, or some people will just get silent and they won't say anything. Some things in our meetings are painful to discuss. Some people don't feel pained about it. Some people do. In John 11, verse 35, Jesus wept. I don't know the specific reason, but I know one thing: people weep when they're sad. Jesus teaches us to have a right to our feelings. And some subjects that we discuss can be very painful. And some things are very pleasant. And I don't feel what you do when that subject is discussed. You don't feel, or I don't feel, what someone else feels when a subject is discussed. Everybody responds to things differently. The point of number 8 is, do we have the right to feel a certain way and not be upset? Maybe at somebody, somebody will, why are you crying? Don't worry about why somebody's crying. Stay on the point of your discussion. Now, think about number 9. It goes along with this. Do we want to have a rule? We will not make fun of what people say in this group. If people are getting together, this could be a group of people trying to help each other. So sometimes people say things and somebody will laugh at them. Well, what if the person speaking isn't laughing? So we should not laugh at other people. If a person's trying to be humorous, that's one thing, but we should never laugh at something that somebody says if they're trying to discuss a point. That's condescending, and it's unkind, and it's unfeeling. And so do we want to have a rule? Nope, you're not going to make fun of what people say in here. We're trying to talk about an issue or solve a problem. Now, a leader has the position of leading the group. He asked the question, number 10, to the group. You go over these rules with your group before you ever have a discussion. I should have said that up front. But the leader's asking the question in number 10, may I, as the leader, have the right to interrupt? Now, why might the leader do that? Well, somebody could be saying something that's hurting somebody's feelings. Somebody could be off subject, off topic. And you remember, you set a time frame. You're going to meet for 30 minutes. You're going to meet for an hour. You're going to meet for whatever, maybe a 10-minute meeting. I don't know. It depends on its purpose. The leader is responsible for keeping the group on the timeline and following an agenda that should have already been prepared before the meeting took place. He's asking, though, do I have the right to interrupt? And the group says yes or no. And then the leader would say, if they say no, why would you say no? Well, because wait just a minute. I'm the leader. I need to have permission to interrupt. And certainly a leader would not want to be rude in doing that, but he may be trying to pull the group back on the subject and maintaining a timetable, because some people can go on and on and on about some things and just get the whole meeting off track. Number 11, will we have a right to disagree with each other? This is a little challenging. If something is a biblical subject, let me say this. It may be a biblical subject, but maybe everybody has not studied this the same. Maybe they've been taught differently about it. Maybe they have studied it more than someone else. Maybe they've never studied it at all, or whatever the issue. So if it's something biblical, okay, what does the Bible say? Be ready to discuss what the Bible says. Now, what if you disagree in a general thing about the way maybe the church is going to do some things? Well, if you disagree with something that's not dealing with Scripture, but maybe a plan, speak up, but be ready to explain why you disagree and maybe give a good reason to help the group. But you're asking permission, the whole group, do we have the right to disagree? Yes or no? Now, another interesting point is number 12. Will we settle group business in the group, or will we go in small groups or one person afterwards and talk about each other? There's another principle in Matthew 18 and verse 15. Jesus says, if your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. Some translations simply say, if your brother sins, they don't say against you. If your brother sins or sins against you, you know about it, go tell the whole church. No. Jesus says you go talk to that person privately. Now, let's say that this is a group discussion and the group has reached a conclusion. Yes, this is what we're going to do. Yes, this is correct, or whatever conclusion you draw. And then some people leave me, so, well, I just don't agree with that. And they go around and tell, well, hold on just a minute. Should you have settled that while the group was together, or go out and tell everybody else? Jesus is teaching us another principle. If you have an issue with something in the group that maybe you don't agree with, or maybe a conclusion was not reached, sometimes you don't settle everything in one meeting. You might need two, you might need three or more. But when you talk about it, will you bring it back to the group, or are you going to go tell everybody else? And the principle is you bring it back where it should be. Number 13, do we want to have a rule of confidentiality? What we say here stays here. Sometimes in our group discussions, there are things that are very sensitive in nature that do not need to go out of that room. Perhaps you're dealing with a situation with a brother in the meeting, trying to help that brother. And so what you say in that meeting stays in that meeting. You don't go out and tell everybody else. This is especially important for elders who are meeting. I believe most elders understand this, but I don't know that all do. That when you have an elders meeting, some things, okay, do we agree that we don't need to talk about this with anybody else? Yes, we all agree. Do we agree that it's okay to tell the church about this? Let's say it's elders. Or do we need to keep this in the room? Because if it gets out, it could cause a lot of trouble. And it could be turned into gossip. And so confidentiality, plus it has something to do with trust. Let's say that one person in the group, maybe an elder, or maybe just a group of the men, or maybe just a group of Christians. And somebody says, I've got a problem and I need for y'all to pray about it. I need some help. Well, okay, you're going to have a rule that this discussion stays right here. It doesn't go anywhere else. And it's important to understand confidentiality. Number 14, will I take care of myself, telling the group only what I trust them to keep? That ties in with the previous point, number 13, and confidentiality. If you don't think that sharing something with the group is a good idea, then don't share it. Keep it to yourself. You may need to find someone to help you, but maybe not in that group. But you're responsible for what you tell or what you say. And that comes back to an individual. Will I take care of myself? Be careful what you say, because people hear. Sometimes they misunderstand. Number 15, what if I say offends someone or hurts someone? Let's say that something is said in a group setting, if it's elders or a group of men, or just maybe in a Bible class. These are good rules for Bible classes too. Any meeting in the church, for any adults in the church, it could be good. But if I say something that offends you, or you say something that offends someone, will you go tell that person that you hurt my feelings? Or are you going to go and talk about, well, you wouldn't believe what so-and-so said in our meeting the other day. It's hurt my feelings awful, but they didn't go to them. That takes us back to Matthew 18:15. Go and talk to them privately. And the thing is, if you do feel offended, maybe someone said something that offended you. They may not have intended to, but they may have offended you. Will you go and talk to them about it? Or can you just let it go? Those are options. Number one, you could let it go. Or number two, it's bothering you. You need to go talk to them. And if it keeps coming up in your mind that somebody said or did something that offended you and you can't seem to get rid of it, then you really need to go talk to them. But we're trying to help solve problems and be faithful and helpful brethren. Number 16, if a group session is over and you realize that you didn't get finished with something you wanted to talk about in the meeting, the time frame was set, the time frame was met, you finished, but you didn't get finished with what you wanted to say. So will you be responsible enough to make yourself a note to bring it up next time and say, I really wanted to talk a little more about this and I did not get finished last time. Or, will you bring the matter back? I mean, if it's something you really thought needed to be continued to be discussed, will you be responsible enough to say, I didn't get finished last time and I would like to bring this up. I want to bring up one other point here about giving the leader permission to lead the group, giving the leader permission to interrupt. He's in charge because you've given him permission to be. Then, and you're going to speak one at a time. One of the things I learned when I was in elementary school or in any other class in school, if I wanted to the teacher's attention, I would raise my hand. I would not interrupt the teacher. I would not just start talking in the middle of class. I would raise my hand. And once the teacher recognized me, then I would get my permission to speak. So it kind of goes back to this, if you didn't get finished, the next time the meeting comes around, maybe the group leader could say, is there anything that we talked about last time that anybody didn't get finished with? A good leader kind of is on track with what's going on, but maybe he doesn't remember that. Is there anything that needs to be brought up from the last meeting? Somebody raises their hand. Yes, I did not get finished with what I was talking about last week. Is it okay for us to talk about it more? And the leader says yes or no. Now, when you talk about attitude, number 17 is very important. Our attitude toward our brethren. May we be humble instead of arrogant. That is, if we don't know what someone else is thinking or feeling, will we ask or do we assume that we know what they're thinking? Do we just assume that? If you go and look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 3. Matthew 5 and verse 3. Jesus makes the following point. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That is a statement of humility. And so don't be thinking, well, I know what somebody's thinking well, that's a little arrogant. But in another principle that we can learn is in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11. Now, Paul here is talking about his inspiration by the Holy Spirit for the revelations he received and his preaching. We understand there is a Holy Spirit miraculous aspect to this, but it's another principle that can be learned. Verse 11 says of 1 Corinthians 2, for who among men knows the thoughts of man except the spirit of the man which is in him? In other words, how can I know what someone else is thinking? Well, I can't. I can't read minds. God can, but I can't. So I don't know what somebody said. I know why you did that. You did that because, now wait just a minute. How do you know that's why I did that? Because I just know. How do you know what someone else is thinking? When they tell you what they're thinking. That's the only way you can know. So, well, I didn't do that for the reason you thought. I did that for a totally different reason. And it's wrong to try to judge people's actions by thinking they did what they did because you just know. No, you don't. None of us are mind readers. I failed that in school. Everybody failed mind reading in school. Now, so be careful about that. Do not assume that you know what someone else is thinking or feeling. The only way you can know, continue reading the verse. Even so, the thoughts of God no one knows except the Spirit of God. So, verse again. For who among you knows the thoughts of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Nobody. I'm the only one that knows my thoughts. And I certainly don't know God's. Now, Paul's talking about inspiration and God's word being revealed, but that's the only way they'd know. Number 18, may others respond to what we say. Will we give permission to others responding to what we say in our meeting? Or do we expect to just say something, that's the end of it, and nobody has a chance to say anything about it? Well, that's not fair to do that because sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes my ideas are not the best. May not be wrong, they just may not be the best. Somebody says, well, that's a good idea, but what if we did this? Be respectful to one another. But do we give others permission to respond to what we say, whether we're the group leader or just someone in the group? Number 19, when we ask a question, will we be willing to tell why we want to know the answer? When you give a question, will you be willing to explain, let me tell you why I want to know this? Don't just throw a question out there, but you have a purpose for it. And yet, that's a good question to say yes to. Now, number 20, may a person decide to quit talking when they choose? Somebody says, why is that rule in there? Well, sometimes a person starts talking about something and they've said all they want to say about it. And maybe somebody in the group, well, can you give us? No, I am through talking about this. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to say anything else about it. So do we want to have a rule that says when I'm finished talking, I'm done? Please don't try to force me to talk more about something that I don't want to talk about anymore, at least not right now. Number 21, this is very important. Will we agree to attend all sessions? Now, this could be a group session where people are trying to get together and solve a problem. It could be an International Academy of Biblical Studies Bible class. It can be a Bible class in the local congregation. I know one of the biggest problems we have in the church is getting people to return to the assemblies, a Bible class or for worship. But it's important to agree to, let's say that you're trying to deal with a certain issue. Maybe it's an emotional issue or it's group therapy of some kind. Well, if you quit in the middle of it, you're not going to get the best of it. Will we attend all the sessions? And if there's some reason that you cannot be in the meeting, you want to schedule your meetings, not only your time frame, but the days, how often. And so you've agreed to all this. If you're going to be absent, will you be responsible enough to tell the group why you're not going to be there? Well, I have to go because I've got to be at a certain, and it's a real good reason. Or, well, I just don't want to come anymore. Well, there may be people that quit, but it's important if you're depending, now let me clarify this number 21. It depends on the purpose of the group. It could be a marriage counseling session between the preacher and a couple. Could be the biggie here. So, you may get halfway. So you said, okay, the preacher says, all right, it's going to take this many sessions because he's got it planned out to deal with your marital problems. And so will you agree that husband, will you agree you'll come to all the sessions? Wife, will you agree that you come to all the sessions? Yes. And then you get about halfway through, the husband or the wife want to quit. But then you got a rule here, so you can't quit. I told you so many sessions, and you said you would do that. Now, not everybody's going to keep that rule. Now, I'm going to skip number 22, because, but if depending on what the subjects are, that number 22 could have some flexibility to it. That's something you've got to figure out. Now, number 23, while in the discussion and exploration of new ideas, will the group allow any title, position, seniority, family relationships, age, and so forth inhibit the process? Well, they've got more money, we ought to listen to them. Or they've been in the church longer than anybody else, we ought to listen. No, everybody's on the same level. Do we agree that everybody is equal in their concern and their interest and their input? One is just as important as another. Yes, it's true. There may be times we need to listen to someone who's been in the church a long time, someone who has a better understanding of certain things. But even a new Christian can have some good ideas that nobody else thought about. So be careful that you don't want to create some kind of pyramid of authority here, except for the group leader. Now, number 24, are we aware that some of these rules will probably be broken? Will we learn about ourselves and leadership when they are broken? Sometimes rules will be broken. But the question is, are we willing to learn from, okay, these were broken. Are we willing to learn why it was important not to break that rule? Why is it important to keep your word, to tell the truth? You agreed to come to all the meetings, for example, and so quit. Well, is it okay to have a discussion about why they want to quit? And is it okay to have these and learn from these things? Number 25, will we agree to apply these biblical principles to ourselves first before we try to fix other people? In Psalm 139, 23 and 24, the psalmist said to God, you search me, oh God. David wrote that psalm. He wanted God to search him, to look at him. He wasn't asking God to search out everybody else. He wanted to make sure that he was right with his God. So read Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 27. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 27. Paul says, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Paul was applying God's will to himself first, not to other people. There are folks who want to fix everybody except themselves. Do we want to agree that we're going to work on ourselves first before we try to fix somebody else? Maybe it's a group therapy, trying to get a group to work better together. Look at 2 Corinthians 13:5, where Paul says, examine yourselves whether you be in the faith. Now, I know that the Bible teaches us that we should try to restore someone who has been overtaken in a fault. That's Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2. You do it gently. But the point is, in 1 Corinthians 9 and 13:5, test yourselves. Test yourself first. Are you in the faith? If you or I are not living the way we're supposed to live, we have no business trying to straighten somebody else out or even try to guide them because we're not prepared. And so look up at 1 Corinthians 10 at verse 2. And 2 Corinthians 10. 2 Corinthians 10 in verse 2. 2 Corinthians 10, 2. Paul says, I ask that when I'm absent, I may not be bold with the confidence. It's verse 12. My pardon there. For we are not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with others, they're without understanding. We don't measure ourselves by other people. We measure ourselves by what God says, and then we look to see if we measure up to it. Now, this kind of goes back to one of the earlier points, and I think I'm going to just kind of quickly hit 26. May we bring up old business if we need to clarify or discuss something further. It may not be something that wasn't finished. Maybe it was something that was talked about several meetings ago, but maybe something was not clear to someone. We're going to have a rule that we can do that. The leader is responsible for the time frame, but it's a good rule. And what if people see these guidelines and say, I have some things I'd like to add to this that I think would be helpful? Is it okay? Do we get permission for people to give additional rules if the group sees those as valuable and helpful? Number 28. Would you be willing to tell what you like about this group process, if it's helpful or not? I'll tell you one thing, and then the lesson will be yours, because the discussion rules in the remainder of this lesson are expanded further. Brother Jerry Barber did this outline, and this next one is a chapter out of his book, so you can read that. But I taught a class a couple of years ago for the Georgia School of Preaching. And when I got finished, I asked them, I said, would you mind telling me if this class was helpful? And if so, how? If it was not helpful, is there something I can do better? If there's something you didn't understand, is there something I said that you don't agree with? This comes back to the leader or the teacher. Let other people evaluate what you do and say. They may be mistaken. They may have misunderstood, or you may need to make some changes in the way you present things. Our goal, talking about teachers, is to help people learn. And if that's not occurring, if that's not happening, then we're not doing a very good job. So it's good to ask, what do you think about this class? What do you think about this group? What do you think about these things we've been talking about? What do you think about me as a leader? Have I done my job? Is there some way I can improve? Did I help you? Did I say or do something that needs to be different? You've got to be willing to take suggestions, because that's how we grow spiritually.